Sometimes, the most broken hearts recognize each other in the quiet. In a forgotten mining town nestled in the hills, the silent suffering of a young girl finally catches the eye of the one man who still remembers what it means to protect the innocent. 7-year-old Clara Ara bears bruises no child should ever know, living under the cruel hand of her stepmother. Hank Dalton is a widowed cowboy, living alone with his dog Buster on the outskirts of town. But when he witnesses Clara's pain on a frigid night, something stirs in his weary soul. What he uncovers will shake this town to its core. When the law fails and good people stay silent, what will an old cowboy do to save a child who has no one else? Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something very special in store for you. The town of Ridgeline sat in a valley between snow-capped mountains, like a faded memory. Once it had been a place of promise, with silver mines drawing dreamers from everywhere. But that was 30 years ago. The veins ran dry, the company pulled out, and most folks followed. What remained was a cluster of weathered buildings, a single muddy road, and about 200 stubborn or impoverished souls too rooted to leave. Winter gripped the town in an unyielding hold that wouldn't ease until April. Snow blanketed the roofs and piled against the fences, while smoke rose from chimneys in thin gray plumes, scattered by the wind before they could touch the sky. The mountains loomed on all sides, beautiful and indifferent, their sharp peaks cutting against the winter blue. Hank Dalton lived on the edge of town, where the road gave way to open fields. His property was modest, a small cabin he'd built himself, a slightly leaning barn, a chicken coop, and a few acres of snow-covered pines and pastures. At 62, he looked older than his years, his face etched with lines from hard work and heavier memories. In his youth, he'd been a ranch hand in Montana and Wyoming, a life that gave him a straight posture, strong hands, and a quiet way of moving through the world. He wasted no words or motions. Everything he did was deliberate, purposeful. 8 years earlier, he'd buried his wife, Sara, on the hill behind the cabin, under the pine tree she loved. Cancer had taken her slowly over 2 years, and Hank had watched the light fade from her eyes, like a sunset slipping away. When she died, something in him died too, or perhaps just went to sleep. They had never had children. God knows they tried. Sara had lost 3 babies before they gave up hope. Each loss a small death, a future erased. But she had kept her warmth, her gentle way of seeing the good in things. Hank had learned to live with the emptiness, filling his days with work and his nights with exhaustion. Now he lived alone, except for Buster. The dog was a 10-year-old blue heeler, with gray and black speckled fur and eyes that seemed to understand more than a dog should. Hank had gotten him as a pup, a year after Sara's death, and Buster became his shadow, his companion, his reason to face the mornings when loneliness felt suffocating. Hank's days followed a steady routine. He rose before dawn, fed the chickens, chopped wood, and tended to the endless repairs. He kept to himself mostly. Once a week he'd head into town for supplies: flour, coffee, chicken feed. He'd exchange polite words with the shopkeepers and nod to neighbors, but he never lingered. He'd head home before the loneliness in others' eyes could remind him of his own. He'd seen the girl before, of course. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone, even if they didn't speak. Clara was small for 7, thin as a willow branch, with dark, tangled hair and eyes that seemed too big for her face. She moved through town like she was trying to vanish, hugging the buildings, head down, shoulders hunched against more than just the cold. Her father, Thomas Yates, had worked the mines until an accident took him 2 years ago, a cave-in that claimed 3 lives, including his. Clara's mother had died giving birth to her, so she'd been raised by her father alone until that day left her an orphan at 5. That's when Martha stepped in. Martha Yates was Thomas's half-sister, though she kept her maiden name. In her 40s, she had striking features and gray hair pulled back severely. She ran a sewing business from home, mending clothes, doing laundry, and occasionally making dresses for weddings or funerals. She'd never married, and town gossip said it was because she'd loved Thomas before his wife came along. Hank didn't know if that was true, but there was a bitterness in Martha, a hardness that showed in the set of her mouth and the coldness of her eyes. She took Clara in after Thomas's death, calling it a Christian duty. The girl had nowhere else to go, and the county orphanage was overcrowded and a full day's journey away. So Martha became Clara's guardian, and people thought it a kindness, but Hank had his doubts. He'd noticed things. The way Clara flinched at sudden movements, how she wore long sleeves even in summer. The bruises on her arms explained away as clumsiness or falls. She never smiled, never played with the other children, never let that spark shine in her eyes that every kid should have. Most folks in Ridgeline had learned to ignore the unpleasant. The town was dying, had been for so long, that people saved their energy for their own troubles. If Martha was harsh with the girl, well, raising a child alone was tough. If Clara seemed unhappy, well, she was an orphan. What did you expect? It was easier to look away, mind your own business, tell yourself that interfering would only make it worse. Hank understood that pull. He'd spent 8 years withdrawing from the world himself. But something about the girl nagged at him. Maybe it was because he and Sara had wanted a child so badly. Maybe Clara reminded him of the daughter they never had. Or maybe it was simpler. He just recognized suffering when he saw it. The town itself was dying with a quiet dignity. Main Street had a general store run by Mrs. Henley, a stout woman who knew everyone's business and shared it freely. There was Dr. Peterson's office, though he was 70 with shaky hands. The saloon was half empty these days. The church had a visiting pastor who came twice a month, and the one-room schoolhouse where Miss Hartley taught 15 students aged 6 to 14. Sheriff Drummond kept the peace as best he could. He was in his 50s, overweight, with a gray mustache, and he preferred to talk things out, avoid confrontations. He'd been elected because no one else wanted the job, and he did it with a weary resignation. The jail, a small room attached to his office, hadn't held anyone overnight in 3 years. These were Hank's neighbors, the people he saw on his weekly trips into town. Good people, mostly. Just tired ones who'd stayed in a fading place because they had nowhere else or leaving felt like giving up. It was late January when Hank really started noticing Clara. He was splitting wood in his yard, a never-ending chore in winter, when she passed by on the road. She was alone as usual, trudging through the snow in boots too big for her feet, clutching something to her chest. Even from a distance, he could see her shoulders shaking, hear her quiet sobs. He paused mid-swing, axe raised, and watched her go. She didn't look his way. She never did. She just kept walking, head down, toward Martha's house at the far end of town. Buster whimpered softly at Hank's feet, ears perked, sensing something amiss. "I know, boy," Hank murmured. "I know." That night, Sitting in his cabin with a cooling cup of coffee on the table, he stared at the photograph above the fireplace. It was an old, faded image of him and Sara on their wedding day, both so young and full of hope. She was smiling, that smile that always made his heart feel too big for his chest. "What would you do, Sara?" he whispered to the photo. "You always knew what was right." The photo didn't answer, but he knew what she'd say. "Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Remember that turning away from suffering makes you part of it." So he started paying attention. He noticed Clara rarely went to school. When she did, she sat alone and only spoke when called. He heard Martha's angry voice rising from her house on dark nights. He saw Clara in the same worn dress day after day, her coat too thin, her face gaunt with a hunger that went beyond skipped meals. And he realized no one else seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to act. The realization settled over him like snow on the mountains. Slow, heavy, inevitable. If no one did anything, that girl would be lost. She'd grow up broken or worse, and it would be because good people decided it wasn't their problem. Hank had spent 8 years being no one's problem, hiding in his grief and solitude. But looking at that photo of Sara, remembering the children they never had, thinking of the bright-eyed girl Clara could still be, he felt something stir in his chest. Purpose, that's what Sara would call it. "All right?" he said softly to the empty cabin. "All right?" Buster lifted his head from his spot by the fire, ears up. Hank knelt and scratched behind the dog's ears. "Maybe we've got some work to do, old friend. Maybe it's time to stop hiding." The next morning, Hank stood at the window, watching the road. It was still dark, the sun not yet over the mountains, but he saw lights in Martha's house. A small figure flickered briefly before vanishing inside. Clara. He didn't know yet what he'd do or how, but with the certainty of 62 years of life, he knew he couldn't look away anymore. Sometimes, the most broken hearts recognize each other in the quiet. And sometimes, when you're ready to give up on the world gives you a reason to keep going. For Hank Dalton, that reason passed by his property every day in boots too big for her feet, carrying more pain than any child should know. The sky was turning purple with twilight when it happened, the moment that changed everything. Hank was out on the road, splitting wood for the next morning's fire. February had arrived cold and merciless, with winds that cut through layers and froze breath in your lungs. He worked steadily, the rhythm of the axe familiar and soothing, when he heard the crying. It wasn't a loud wail or a tired child's tantrum. It was a hushed, stuttering sob, the sound of someone who'd learned that tears brought no help. He looked up and saw her. Clara was about 30 yards down the road, heading toward Martha's house. In the dim light, he could see she was limping, favoring her left leg. Her coat hung open despite the chill, and she clutched something to her chest with both hands. As he watched, she stumbled. Her foot caught on something hidden under the snow, maybe a rut, or just the weight of exhaustion, and she fell hard. Whatever she was carrying flew from her hand and landed in the snow a few feet away. She didn't get up right away. She just lay there, small and curled in on herself, her sobs growing a little louder. Hank set down his axe. "Come on, Buster." The dog was already moving, trotting toward Clara with ears forward and tail low, the stance he took when something was wrong. Hank approached slowly, the way you would a wounded animal, not wanting to scare her more than she already was. When he reached her, She was trying to push herself up, breathing in ragged gasps that could be sobs or pain. "Take it easy," he said gently. "No rush." Clara lifted her head sharply, and for the first time, he saw her face up close. Her eyes were red and swollen, her cheeks pale except for two bright spots flushed by the cold. A bruise marred her jaw, a mix of purple and yellow hues from days past, while a fresher one darkened her temple. Her lip was split on one side, but what truly stopped Hank's heart was the raw terror in her gaze. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. It wasn't my fault. I'll go. I'm leaving now." "You didn't do anything wrong," Hank said quickly, keeping his voice steady and calm. "I just want to make sure you're not hurt. That was quite a fall." She shivered, whether from the chill or fear or both, he couldn't tell. Buster edged closer, nudging her hand with his nose and letting out a soft whine. Clara Ara glanced at the dog, and something in her expression softened. She reached out hesitantly to touch his head. "This is Buster," Hank said. "He's worried about you. Are you all right? Can you stand?" Clara Ara nodded, but she didn't move, her eyes fixed on the object that had fallen from her hands. A small wooden horse, carved but worn with age. One of its legs was completely broken. "My father made this," she whispered. "It's all I have left of him, and now it's broken. She's going to be so angry." Her voice cracked on the last word, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. Hank carefully picked up the horse. It was clearly handmade with care and love. The break was clean and recent. The missing leg lay half buried in the snow nearby. He retrieved it. "This can be fixed," he said. "A bit of glue, some sanding, and it'll be good as new." Clara Ara looked at him, disbelief and hope warring in her eyes. "Really? I fix things all the time. Toys are easy." She was shaking violently now, and Hank realized it wasn't just fear or cold. The girl was as thin as a rail, her coat barely more than a rag. In this weather, she could freeze. "Let me help you up," he said. "Then we'll warm you up a bit before you head home. Just for a minute. Buster and I were about to have some hot coffee. Well, coffee for me, but I've got hot chocolate if you prefer." "I can't," Clara Ara replied quickly, fear flashing across her face again. "I have to get home before dark." She glanced at the sky, the last light fading behind the mountains, her breathing quickening. "Where do you live?" Hank asked, though he already knew. "With Mrs. Marta at the edge of town?" She was trying to stand now, wincing as she put weight on her left leg. "It's still a ways off. At least let me walk with you. It's getting dark and your leg looks painful." "No!" The word came out sharp, panicked. "No, please. If she sees you with me, she'll be furious." Clara Ara froze at the mention of the name. He realized he'd never spoken to her directly before. "I won't let anything bad happen to you," Hank said quietly. "I promise." For a moment, she seemed to believe him. Then, a voice cut through the cold air like a whip. "Clara Ara! Clara Ara, where are you?" The change in the girl was instant and heartbreaking. Every muscle in her small body tensed, her eyes widened, and she let out a sound that was almost a whimper. Martha appeared at the end of the street, striding toward them with quick, angry steps. Even from a distance, Hank could see the hardness in her face, her shoulders rigid. "It's her," Clara whispered. "It's Mrs. Marta. Please, Mr. Dalton, please don't say anything." "Come here, child," Martha's voice called, cold and sharp. What did I tell you about Dowling? Clara Ara scrambled to her feet, forgetting her limp in her haste. She reached for the wooden horse, but Hank had already slipped it into his coat pocket, along with the broken leg. I'll keep it safe, he murmured. I'll fix it for you. She gave him a desperate, grateful glance before running toward Martha as fast as her injured leg allowed. Hank straightened, watching Martha approach. She was a woman who might once have been beautiful, but time and discontent had etched harsh lines into her features. Her eyes were dark and cold as river stones. Mr. Dalton, she said, her tone civil but barely. I hope Clara Ara hasn't bothered you. Not at all, Hank replied calmly. She fell. I was just checking if she was hurt. Martha's eyes flicked to Clara Ara, then back to him. She's clumsy. Always has been. Doesn't watch where she's going. Her hand shot out, grabbing Clara Ara's arm without gentleness. How many times have I told you to pay attention? Clara didn't respond, keeping her eyes fixed on the ground. Well, thank you for your concern, Martha said to Hank, her words clipped. We're going now. Come, Clara Ara. She turned, pulling the girl with her. Clara stumbled, trying to keep up, and Hank saw Martha tighten her grip. Clara bit her lip, but made no sound. Hank watched them go, Martha's voice carrying on the wind, scolding, angry. He couldn't make out the words, but he didn't need to. He'd heard that tone before, long ago, from his own father toward a neighbor. Buster whined at his feet, restless and unhappy. I know, boy, Hank said softly. I know. He glanced at the dog, then back at the retreating figures. Martha was dragging Clara Ara along, and even from afar, he could see the child crying again. Something settled in his chest. Cold, hard, and utterly certain. Back in his cabin, he stood by the fireplace, looking at a photograph of Sara. The broken wooden horse lay on the table beside it. I can't let this go, he said to the image of his wife. I thought I could mind my own business, but I can't. Not with this, not with her. He remembered his own childhood, his father stepping in to protect a neighbor's son. His father's words echoed. Some things are worth the fight. Some battles you can't ignore and still live with yourself. Hank was young then, maybe 10, and he'd asked what would happen if the neighbor fought back. His father had looked at him steadily. Then I'd keep fighting until that boy was safe. That's what you do when a child needs protecting. You protect them. No calculations, no weighing costs. You just do it. Now, standing in his cabin with the broken toy in his hands and the memory of a terrified girl fresh in his mind, Hank understood. He couldn't save the children he and Sara had lost. He couldn't bring Sara back or revive the town or make the mines yield silver again. But maybe, just maybe, he could save one girl who had no one else. He looked at Buster. What do you think, old friend? Are we ready for this? The dog's tail thumped once on the floor. Hank took the horse to his workbench. He'd need wood glue, a steady hand, and time to let it dry. He'd have to sand it smooth where the brake had splintered. But above all, he'd need a plan. Because Martha wouldn't give up Clara Ara willingly. The law wouldn't intervene based on one man's observations. The town wouldn't rise in outrage. If Clara Ara was to be saved, Hank would have to do it alone, and he would, no matter the cost. That night, he worked late, piecing the horse together, letting the glue set, sanding away the imperfections. When he finally went to bed, the toy was whole again on his bench. Tomorrow, he'd figure out how to make Clara whole, too. The following week passed slowly, a careful exercise of watching and waiting. Hank altered his routines. Instead of chopping wood early in the morning when few were around, he did it in the afternoon when Clara Ara might pass by. Instead of going to town once a week, he went 3 times, lingering in the general store, listening to conversations that flowed around him like water around a stone. He learned Martha's patterns. Every morning at 8, she left for her sewing work, sometimes at clients' homes, sometimes in her own living room. She'd be gone for hours, leaving Clara Ara alone. The girl was supposed to go to school, but she often didn't. Miss Hartley mentioned it once to Mrs. Henley in the store. That Yates girl missed 3 days this week again. I don't know what to do. When I asked Martha, she said Clara Ara was ill, but the child didn't look sick. She just seemed. Mrs. Henley tutted. Martha's so busy, raising a child at her age without a husband. It's admirable, really. But is it? Miss Hartley whispered. Mrs. Henley's face closed like a door. The child has a roof over her head and food in her belly. That's more than some can say. Best not to stir up trouble where there isn't any. Hank bought his flour and coffee and left without a word, but the conversation lingered. People knew, even if they wouldn't admit it. They sensed something was wrong, but didn't want to see it clearly enough to act. He visited Dr. Patterson next, making up an excuse about a persistent cough, though the old man saw through it immediately. You're not coughing, Hank, he said, setting down his stethoscope with a knowing look. So, why don't you tell me what's really on your mind? Hank appreciated the directness. It's about Clara Ara Yates. I've seen her bruises, the way she moves like she's in pain. How thin she is. The doctor fell silent for a long moment, then sighed and sank into his chair. What do you want me to say, Hank? That I haven't noticed? I'd be lying. That girl's been in here 6 times this year. Martha says she's clumsy, bumps into things in the dark. Do you believe that? Hank asked. Does it matter what I believe? Without Clara Ara speaking up or another adult filing a formal complaint, my hands are tied. Even if they weren't, what would you have me do, take a child from her legal guardian based on suspicions? Martha has the right to raise her as she sees fit, however strict. There's a line between strict and cruel, Hank said. I know the difference. The doctor's eyes were sad. Knowing and proving are 2 different things. Want to help that child? Get her to talk. Find someone with legal standing to make a complaint. Ask the sheriff to investigate, but don't expect an old country doctor to fix what the whole town pretends doesn't exist. It wasn't the answer Hank wanted, but it was honest. He tried Sheriff Drummond next, finding him outside his office on a chilly afternoon. Sheriff, I need to talk to you about Clara Ara Yates. Drummond's expression turned neutral. What's going on with her? She's being abused. Martha's hurting her. That's a serious accusation, Hank. Do you have proof? I've seen the bruises. Dr. Patterson has too, and so has Miss Hartley. Bruises happen. Kids fall, they play rough. They're not always careful. Drummond shifted uncomfortably. Look, I know Martha can be tough, but she took that child in when no one else would. That counts for something. Did you see her hit her? Witness an actual act of violence? No, Hank admitted. Then what do you expect me to do? I can't arrest people on hunches. This is a small town, Hank. People have to live together. If I raid Martha's house based on your suspicions, what precedent does that set? The kind that says we protect kids? Or the kind that says we abuse our authority and ruin reputations over gossip? Drummond's voice hardened. Want to help the girl? Talk to Martha directly. Voice your concerns as a neighbor. But unless you have solid proof, real, concrete evidence, there's nothing I can do legally. Private family matters are not my jurisdiction, Hank. Not unless someone files a formal complaint, or I witness a crime with my own two eyes. Hank walked away from the conversation. The message clear. The law wasn't going to help. At least not quickly enough. Maybe not at all. He saw Clara twice more that week, always from a distance. Once, she was sweeping the porch of Marta's house, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each stroke of the broom sent a fresh ache through her small frame. Another time he saw her returning from the general store, hauling a heavy sack of flour, her thin arms straining against the weight. Both times, he fought the urge to go to her. Both times, he held back. If Marta saw him speaking to the girl, she would only tighten her grip. She'd become more careful, more secretive, and Clara would be the one to pay the price for his interference. So he waited. He planned. And at night, he worked on the wooden horse, making it better than it was before. On the fifth day, he went to the schoolhouse just as Miss Hartley was dismissing her students for the day. Clara wasn't among them, Mr. Dalton, she said, surprised to see him. She was young, perhaps 25, with kind eyes and a practical manner. Can I help you with something? I wanted to ask about Clara Yates, Hank said. How is she doing in school? Miss Hartley glanced around the emptying schoolyard, then beckoned him back inside the quiet building. She closed the door before she spoke. She's absent more than she's here, the teacher said, her voice low. And when she does come, she's withdrawn. She doesn't participate, doesn't play with the other children. She flinches if anyone moves toward her too quickly. I've tried to talk to her, but she won't open up. Have you noticed injuries? Bruises? Yes. She had a bandaged wrist once. Said she'd sprained it. Another time, a black eye. Miss Hartley's frustration was plain to see. Marta always has an explanation. The girl's clumsy, always bumping into things. She sighed. I tried to report my concerns to the county education board. They said that unless there was evidence of ongoing abuse, they couldn't intervene in family matters. Everyone says the same thing, Hank said, the words tasting like ash. Not our business. Not enough evidence. Private family matters. I know. Miss Hartley looked at him directly. But we both know what's happening to her, don't we? We just can't prove it in a way that matters to anyone with power. She paused. If it came to it, would you testify? About the absences, the injuries, her behavior? Testify? Her eyes widened. Are you planning something? I'm planning on keeping that little girl safe. Any way I can. Miss Hartley was silent for a moment, weighing his words. Then she gave a firm nod. Yes. If it came to that, I would testify. I'd put my observations in writing, too, if you needed it. She was the first real ally he had found. That night, Hank sat at his table with the mended wooden horse before him. The little toy was better than new. He'd not only fixed the brake, but had sanded and polished the entire piece, bringing out the grain of the wood and making the carved details sharp and clear. Buster lay at his feet, chin on his paws, watching his master with patient eyes. We're in it now, aren't we, boy? Hank murmured. The dog's tail thumped twice against the floorboards. Outside, the snow was falling again, soft and steady. The mountains were invisible in the darkness, but Hank knew they were there. Solid, enduring, indifferent to the troubles of men. He thought of his father's words, spoken so long ago. Some fights you can't walk away from and still live with yourself. He thought of Sara and the children they never had. He thought of Clara, alone in Marta's house, likely hungry, likely hurting, likely afraid. And he made his decision. The next day, he would find a way to see her, to give her back the horse, to let her know that someone cared, that someone was watching, that someone would act. The law might not protect her, the town might not rise up for her, but he would. He had to, because if he didn't, who would? His opportunity came on a Wednesday morning in early March, when the air had warmed just enough to make you think spring might actually arrive. Hank saw Marta leave for work at her usual time, carrying her sewing basket, and walking with that brisk, determined stride toward the Mackenzie house on the other side of town. She would be gone for hours. Mrs. Mackenzie had commissioned new drapes for her parlor, and Marta had spent the better part of a week at the general store, complaining about the complexity of the job. He waited 30 minutes, just to be sure. Then, he pulled on his coat and nodded to Buster. "Come on, boy. Let's take a walk." They went slowly, Hank keeping to the road, making it look casual. Just a man and his dog, out for some air on a pleasant morning. He had the wooden horse in his coat pocket, carefully wrapped in a soft cloth. Marta's house was set back from the road, a tired-looking structure with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The front windows were masked by faded curtains, and the yard was barren save for the melting snow and a few scraggly bushes. As Hank drew near, he heard a sound from the porch. Clara was there, sweeping, though from the listless way she moved, it was clear her heart wasn't in it. She looked smaller than ever in an oversized dress that might have once belonged to Marta, her thin arms barely filling the sleeves. Buster saw her too. His ears perked, and he let out a low whine. "Easy," Hank murmured. "Let her see you first." They stopped at the edge of the property, not trespassing. Buster sat obediently, his whole body trembling with the desire to run to her, his tail sweeping arcs in the snow. Clara noticed them. She stopped mid-sweep, holding the broom with both hands like a barrier. Her eyes grew wide, not with fear this time, but with something that looked almost like hope. She glanced up and down the road, searching for any sign of Marta, then took a hesitant step toward the edge of the porch. "Hello, Clara," Hank called out gently. "Nice morning, isn't it?" She nodded but said nothing. "Buster here wanted to say hello. He's been thinking about you, wondering if you were all right. Is it okay if he comes closer?" Another nod, more eager this time. Hank unclipped Buster's leash. "Go on, boy. Easy now." The dog trotted forward, his pace relaxed, unthreatening. He stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at Clara, his tail giving slow, friendly wags. Clara set down the broom and carefully walked down the steps, favoring her left side. When she reached Buster, she knelt in the snow and wrapped her arms around the dog's thick neck, burying her face in his fur. Buster stood perfectly still, pressing against her and making a soft sound that was part groan, part comfort. Hank approached, but kept his distance, giving them their moment. "He likes you," he said. "Dogs are good judges of character, you know. They can tell when someone has a kind heart." Clara's voice was muffled by Buster's coat, but Hank heard her whisper, "I like him too." For several minutes, she just held the dog. Buster, bless him, seemed to understand what was needed. He stood as solid as a rock, letting her draw whatever comfort she could from his warmth and steady presence. Finally, Clara pulled back and looked up at Hank. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. Marta doesn't like dogs. She says they're dirty and useless. Well, Marta's entitled to her opinion, Hank said carefully. But I'd say a good dog is worth his weight in gold. Buster here's been my best friend for 10 years. I don't know what I'd do without him. 10 years? Clara seemed awed by this. That's a long time. It is. We've been through a lot together, him and me. Hank paused, then said gently, I have something for you. Something I fixed. He pulled the cloth-wrapped horse from his pocket and held it out. Clara's eyes went huge. She rose slowly, wincing as she straightened, and took the bundle with trembling hands. When she unwrapped it and saw the horse, whole again, polished and beautiful, she gasped. You fixed it, she breathed. You really fixed it. I promised I would. I always keep my promises. She turned the horse over and over in her hands, examining it from every angle. A tear tracked down her cheek, then another. It's even better than before. It's perfect. Your father made it for you, didn't he? Yes, before, her voice hitched, before the mine. He used to make things for me all the time. Little animals. A doll once. He said making things for me was his favorite part of the day. Sounds like he loved you very much. He did, she insisted, clutching the horse to her chest. Marta says I don't deserve to keep his things. She says I'm ungrateful and spoiled. Rage, hot and sharp, flared in Hank's chest, but he forced his voice to remain even. That's not true, Clara. Not one bit. You deserve to have things that remind you of your father. You deserve to be loved and cared for. She looked up at him, her eyes old and knowing in her young face. You really think so? I know so. They stood in silence for a moment. Then, very quietly, Clara said, I wish you were my grandpa. The words struck Hank with the force of a physical blow, not one of pain, but of profound, overwhelming emotion. All the years of wanting a child, all the loss, all the empty spaces in his life suddenly seemed to converge on this one moment. This one little girl. This impossible connection. I'd be honored, was all he could manage, his throat thick. A real smile touched Clara's lips. It was small and fragile, but it was genuine. It transformed her face, making her look like what she was, a 7-year-old child. Can I come visit you sometimes? She asked. When Marta's at work? I promise I won't be any trouble. I'll be real quiet. She glanced down at Buster. I just want to be somewhere safe for a little while. You can come visit me any time you want, Hank said. My door will always be open for you. You and Buster seem to have hit it off, and he'd be mighty disappointed if you didn't come by regular. Really? Hope bloomed on her face. You mean it? I mean it. But Clara... He crouched down to be at her level. If Marta ever does anything that really hurts you, or if you ever get really scared, I want you to come straight to me. Day or night, it doesn't matter. You run to my house and I'll keep you safe. Can you remember that? She nodded solemnly. I'll remember. Good girl. He stood up, noticing how the light had shifted. Marta would be back eventually. You'd better get back to your chores now. We don't want Marta thinking you're slacking. Clara's face fell a little, but she nodded. She gave Buster one more hug and hurried back to the porch, the wooden horse tucked safely in the pocket of her dress. Hank and Buster turned for home, but as they reached the road, Hank looked back. Clara had started sweeping again, but she paused to give him a small, quick wave, like a secret passed between them. He waved back and kept walking. "Well, boy," he said to Buster, "looks like we have a visitor to look forward to." The dog's tail wagged in agreement. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara came to visit 4 times. Always when Marta was gone, always cautious, checking the road before she approached, always careful to leave before Marta's expected return. During those visits, she began to open up. Little things at first. That she liked to draw, that her favorite color was blue, that she missed her father's laugh. Then bigger things. How Marta would lock her in the pantry when she was angry. How meals were often withheld as punishment. How nothing she ever did was good enough. Hank listened to it all, his heart breaking and his resolve hardening in equal measure. He taught her small things, how to carve simple shapes from soft wood, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to recognize different bird songs. He fed her proper meals, hot soup, thick bread, sometimes a slice of pie when he'd been baking. Buster was always there, a warm, constant presence at Clara's side. She spoke to the dog, sometimes more freely than she spoke to Hank, whispering secrets and sorrows into his thick fur. The dog's collar bore a small brass plate, one Sara had engraved years ago. "Our faithful friend." Hank found himself thinking of that inscription often. Faithful, that was Buster, all right. Faithful to him, and now, faithful to Clara. One afternoon, as Clara sat on Hank's cabin floor teaching Buster a new trick, she laughed. It was the first time he had ever heard her laugh. A clear, bright sound that seemed impossible, coming from someone who carried so much pain. "There it is," he said softly. "That's what a 7-year-old is supposed to sound like." She looked up at him, the laugh fading from her face. "Sometimes," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I forget how to be happy. But then I come here, and I remember." "You can remember whenever you want," Hank said. "Happiness isn't something another person can give you or take away. Not permanently, at least. It's something you carry inside you, even when things are hard." "Is that what you do, carry it inside you?" He thought of Sara, of the long years of grief, the slow return to something resembling peace. "I try," he said. "It doesn't always work, but I try." She nodded, as if she understood, then went back to playing with Buster. Hank watched her. This small, wounded, precious child. He knew with absolute certainty that he was already too attached to walk away. In just a few short weeks, she had become a part of his life, as essential as breathing. He would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Whatever price he had to pay, he would pay it. Because some things were worth any cost, and saving a child was one of them. The story of the locked pantry door came out on a Tuesday afternoon, when the rain fell in cold sheets and spring felt further away than ever. Clara arrived at Hank's cabin soaked to the bone, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She hadn't even bothered to check if Marta was gone. She had just run, desperate to escape something Hank could see in her eyes, but hadn't yet been put into words. He wrapped her in blankets by the fire and made her hot tea with honey. Buster curled up beside her, sharing his warmth. For a long time, she just sat there, staring into the flames, clutching the mug with both hands. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Hank asked gently. She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, She locked me in there again. Last night. I couldn't sleep because it's so dark. And I can hear things. Mice or maybe rats. And I get so scared. I can't breathe right. Her voice broke. For how long? Hank asked, keeping his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. From after dinner until this morning. 10 hours, maybe? I'm not sure. There's no window, so I can't tell the time. She took a shaky breath. She does it when she's angry, or when she's been drinking, or sometimes just because she says I need to learn my place. Hank closed his eyes for a moment, fighting for control. How often does this happen? 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. Clara looked at him, an apology on her face as if she thought this was her fault, as if she needed to justify Marta's cruelty. I try to be good. I do everything she says, but it's never enough. She always finds something wrong. Clara, listen to me. Hank moved closer, making sure she was looking at him. None of this is your fault. Not one bit. When adults hurt children, the adult is the one who's wrong, not the child. Do you understand that? She nodded, but he could see she didn't fully believe it. Years of being told she was the problem had left their mark. Is the pantry the only place she locks you? Sometimes my room. But the pantry is worse because there's no bed, just the hard floor. And it's cold. And there's no bathroom. So if I... She trailed off, ashamed. Hank gritted his teeth. This wasn't just cruelty. It was torture. It was the dismantling of a child's spirit, piece by piece. What else? He asked. What else does she do? Clara's fingers tightened on her mug. She hits me. With her hand sometimes, but usually with other things. A wooden spoon. A belt. She paused, swallowing hard. Once with an iron skillet. Is that how you got that mark? Hank gestured to the fading bruise on her chin. Yes. She said I burned the bread. But I didn't. It was perfect. She was just angry about something else. She's always angry about something. Clara's eyes filled with tears. And she says things, terrible things. That I killed my mother by being born. That I'm worthless. That I should have died in the mine instead of my father. She says nobody wants me. That she only keeps me because otherwise people would talk. Every word was a knife in Hank's heart. He'd suspected the physical abuse, had seen the proof of it. But this emotional cruelty, this systematic destruction of a child's self-worth, was almost worse. Does she give you enough to eat? Clara shook her head. She says food costs money and I don't earn my keep. I get 1 meal most days, sometimes 2 if I'm especially good. She makes her own food and eats it in front of me, but she won't let me have any. Her voice dropped lower. I'm hungry all the time. Hank stood up abruptly, needing to move before the rage consumed him. He went to the kitchen and began pulling out food. Bread, cheese, cold chicken from last night's dinner. Apples, a jar of preserves Sara had made last summer, before she died. Eat, he said, placing it all on the table. As much as you want. Don't hold back. Clara stared at the food as if she'd never seen so much in one place. Then, she began to eat. Not quickly, but steadily, like someone who knew they had to make the most of this chance. Hank watched her, his mind racing. This had gone far beyond what he'd imagined. This wasn't just a harsh guardian. It was active, intentional abuse. And if he didn't act soon, it would destroy Clara, or worse. Clara, he said carefully, I want to help you, really help you, but to do that, we might need to get the sheriff involved. We might need to legally get you away from Marta." Clara's eyes widened in panic. "No! Please, Mr. Hank. No, the sheriff won't believe me. Adults never believe kids over other adults. And Marta will say I'm lying. And then it will be worse." Her breathing grew rapid. "The last time someone asked questions, after Dr. Patterson saw my bruises, she told me if I ever told anyone what really happened, she'd send me to the asylum. She said they put bad children in straitjackets and leave them in dark rooms forever." "That's not true," Hank said firmly. "She's trying to scare you." "But what if it is? What if they take me away and it's worse than here? At least here I know what to expect. At least now I have you and Buster to visit." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Please don't make me go away. Please just let me come here sometimes. That's enough. It's all I need." His heart breaking, Hank knelt beside her chair. "All right," he said softly. "All right. I won't do anything you don't want me to do, but Clara, you have to promise me one thing. If it gets really bad, if you think Marta might truly hurt you, or if you just can't take it anymore, you come straight here, day or night. You run as fast as you can, and you don't look back. Can you promise me that?" She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I promise." "Good." He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Now eat some more. You're skin and bones, and we need to fix that." As she ate, Hank considered his options. The sheriff wouldn't act without proof. Dr. Patterson's hands were tied. Miss Hartley could only document so much. The system was designed to protect families, but sometimes the family was exactly what the child needed protection from. He thought of his own father's intervention so many years ago. His father hadn't gone through official channels. He had gone straight to the source, confronting the abuser directly, with the weight of the community behind him. But Ridgeline wasn't that kind of community anymore. It was too small, too frayed, too focused on its own survival. Still, there had to be a way. There had to be something he could do. Clara finished eating and curled up on the sofa, exhausted. Within minutes, she was asleep, Buster lying across her feet like a furry guardian. Hank covered her with another blanket and sat in his chair, watching her sleep. Her face was peaceful now, the fear and pain temporarily erased. This was how she should be all the time. Safe, warm, cared for. On the mantel, Sara's photograph seemed to look down at him with understanding. She had always known what needed to be done and never hesitated to do it. He could almost hear her voice. "Sometimes, loving means making the hard choices, Hank. Sometimes, it means standing up when everyone else sits down." He took Sara's silver locket from his pocket, where he always kept it. He'd carried it every day since she died, a reminder of what they'd shared. Inside was Sara's picture, and on the other side, an empty space where a child's photo was meant to be. Looking at that empty space, then at the sleeping girl on his sofa, Hank felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about protecting Clara anymore. It was about family. It was about filling that empty space with purpose and love and connection. It was about becoming the father he'd always wanted to be. "All right, Sara," he whispered to the photograph on the mantel. "All right. I'm all in. Whatever it takes." Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't quite hear. Buster lifted his head, checking on her, then settled back down. Outside, the rain continued to fall, But inside Hank's cabin, there was warmth and safety, and the beginning of something that felt almost like hope. It wasn't enough. Not yet, but it was a start. By the end of March, Hank had become methodical in building his case. He started keeping a journal, something he'd never done before, documenting every one of Clara's visits, every injury he observed, every piece of information she shared. March 15th. Clara arrived at 10 a.m., bruise on right forearm, approximately 3 inches long, deep purple. Says Marta hit her with a wooden spoon for dropping a plate. Ate 2 bowls of stew and 4 pieces of bread. Left at 2 p.m. March 19th. Clara reports being locked in the pantry overnight again. No visible injuries today, but she is exhausted. Says she can't sleep in there because of the dark. Left after only an hour, worried Marta would be home early. March 22nd. Large contusion on Clara's shoulder blade, visible when she reached for something. Won't say how it happened, just shakes her head. I taught her how to whittle today. The first time I've heard her laugh in a week. The entries accumulated, a careful record of cruelty in black ink. Dr. Patterson quietly provided copies of his medical notes, sealed to be opened only if needed. Miss Hartley wrote a detailed statement about Clara's absences and visible injuries. He kept it all in a metal box under his bed, evidence waiting for the right moment. But he also knew something else had happened, something more important than evidence or documentation. He had fallen in love with this child. He'd fallen in love slowly, then all at once. The way her face lit up when she saw Buster. The way she listened so intently when he taught her things. Her eyes serious and focused. The way she'd started calling him Mr. Hank in a tone that sounded almost like Grandpa. The way she trusted him with her pain and her fears. Sara's locket never left his pocket. Now, sometimes when Clara was playing with Buster or concentrating on a whittling project, Hank would take it out and look at that empty space opposite Sara's picture. He started to imagine Clara's photo there. He started to think about what it would mean to make this permanent, to become not just her protector, but her family. The thought terrified him. He was 62 years old. He'd never been a father, a man living alone in a small cabin with a dog and memories. What did he know about raising a 7-year-old girl? But then Clara would look up at him with those trusting eyes. Or she would take his hand when something scared her. Or she would snuggle up next to Buster and whisper her secrets. And Hank would think, maybe I don't have to know. Maybe I just have to love her and do my best. One afternoon in late March, Clara arrived with something hidden behind her back. Her eyes were shining with excitement, the first time he'd seen her genuinely happy. I made you something, she announced. Close your eyes. Hank closed them, smiling. All right, I'm ready. He felt something being placed in his hands, carefully shaped wood. When he opened his eyes, he was looking at a small, carved dog. It was rough, the proportions not quite right, but the effort and care were evident in every mark. You made this? His voice came out huskier than he'd intended. You've been teaching me to carve, so I thought... She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. It's supposed to be Buster. I know it's not very good, but... It's perfect, Hank said firmly. It's the best gift anyone's given me in years. Her face transformed. Really? Truly? He turned it over in his hands, examining it closely. You have a gift for this, Clara. Your father would be proud. She beamed, then grew more serious. You've taught me so much. To carve wood, to cook a meal, to read the tracks of animals in the dirt. My father used to teach me things like that. He said learning was the most important thing anyone could ever do. Your father was a wise man. Hank placed the newly carved wooden dog on the mantelpiece, right next to a faded photograph of Sara. And you're a fine student. You learn quickly. You're patient with your mistakes. Those are rare qualities. Clara drifted closer to the fireplace, her eyes fixed on the photograph. Is that your wife? The one who passed? Yes, that's Sara. We were married for 35 years. She was beautiful. Clara tilted her head. Was she nice? The nicest person I ever knew, Hank said, a gentle warmth filling his voice. Kind to everyone. Always saw the best in people. She would have liked you a great deal, even if I'm no good. A familiar tightness seized Hank's chest. What makes you think you're not good? Miss Martha says so. She says I'm bad, that I have a wicked spirit, that I make her life harder. Clara's voice was flat, objective, as if she were reciting a fact from a textbook. Clara, look at me. He waited until her gaze met his. Martha is wrong. You are good. You are kind and brave and smart. You take care of others even when you're hurting yourself. You love Buster, though you've never had a dog before. You learn everything I teach you, and then you make something beautiful to give back. That isn't bad. That's extraordinary. But if I was good, wouldn't she love me? Wouldn't she want to keep me? The question shattered his heart. Sometimes, people get so lost in their own pain, they can't see the good right in front of them. Martha is carrying something heavy inside her. Anger, or sadness, or bitterness, and she's letting it spill onto you. But that is her failing, Clara, not yours. Love isn't something you earn by being perfect. It's given freely, to the people who matter. And you matter, Clara. You matter a great deal. Tears welled in her eyes. I wish you were my real family. I wish we were too, Hank said softly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that shared wish hanging in the air between them. Then Clara's eyes fell upon the locket Hank had left on the small table. She reached for it, her touch delicate. May I see? He nodded. She carefully opened the clasp. She studied Sara's tiny photograph for a long time, then glanced at the empty space on the other side. There's room for another picture, she observed. Ah, yes. Whose picture do you think should go there? A lump formed in Hank's throat. We had originally hoped to put our son's picture there, but we never had any children. Clara looked from him to the locket and back to him again. Maybe, she stopped, suddenly shy. Maybe one day you could put my picture in there, if you wanted to. I wouldn't mind. The words hung between them, heavy with a meaning far beyond the simple object. It wasn't a child asking for a place in a locket. It was a child asking for a place in a family. I would like that, Hank managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. I would like that very much. Clara smiled, one of her rare, genuine smiles, and handed the locket back. Then she was off to play with Buster, as if she hadn't just said something that changed everything. Hank sat there, holding the locket, staring at that empty space. He thought about what it would take to fill it. Legal guardianship, perhaps adoption, a confrontation with Martha. convincing the courts that a 62-year-old widower could provide Thad a better home than the child's legal guardian. It seemed impossible. But then, it had also seemed impossible for Sara to survive for 2 years with cancer when the doctors had only given her 6 months. It had seemed impossible for Hank to survive the grief after she was gone, just like this connection with Clara. This unexpected second chance at a family might be impossible, but that just meant it would be harder, not that it couldn't be done. That evening, as Clara prepared to leave, checking the road first to make sure it was clear, Hank stopped her. "Clara, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter how hard things get, you have a place here, with me and Buster. Do you understand?" She nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mr. Hank. And if you ever need help, I mean real emergency help, you come straight here. Don't stop. Don't hesitate. You run. I'll be waiting." She paused at the door. "Mr. Hank, thank you for taking me in." "You don't need to thank me, child. This is what people who care for each other do." She smiled and slipped out into the gathering dusk. Hank watched her go, Buster whining softly beside him. The dog knew what Hank was thinking, that letting her go back there, even for one more night, felt fundamentally wrong. But they had to be smart. They had to build their case carefully, gather allies, wait for the right moment. Still, as he closed the door and looked at the carved dog on the mantel next to Sara's picture, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Martha had noticed the change in Clara's spirits. Her eyes grew suspicious, and she started asking sharp questions about where Clara went during the day. Clara lied, saying she was exploring the woods, gathering things to draw, but Martha was no fool. Eventually, she would find out. And when she did, Hank knew she would tighten the leash. She would lock Clara up more often, watch her more closely, punish her more severely. The thought made him sick to his stomach. Soon, he promised the empty room. "We'll make our move soon." But soon might not be fast enough. The first sign that things had changed came on a cold Tuesday in early April. That's when Hank saw the men. Two of them, rough-hewn types from out of town, pulled up to Martha's house in a wagon that had seen better days. They weren't the kind of men you saw in Ridgeline, dressed a little too fine, with eyes that darted about like predators in a sheep pasture. Hank was splitting wood when they arrived. He stopped, lowered his axe, and watched. The men knocked on Martha's door. She answered quickly, as if she'd been expecting them, and even from a distance, Hank could see the tension in her posture. The conversation was brief and clearly heated. One man gestured sharply. Martha shook her head. The other man stepped closer and said something that made Martha physically recoil. Then they left, climbing back into their wagon and rattling out of town. Martha stood on her porch for a long moment after they were gone, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Then she went inside and slammed the door. That night, Hank made a point of visiting the saloon, something he rarely did. He nursed a single whiskey and listened to the chatter around him. He heard about them all right. Someone was saying they looked like debt collectors, wondering who they were after. "Martha Yates, I hear," Mrs. Henley's voice cut across the room. "My husband saw them leaving her place. Said she looked spooked." "Huh," another voice grumbled, skeptical. "Martha owes money?" "Wouldn't surprise me," said old Pete Miller, the blacksmith. "She's been spending more than a seamstress makes. New fabrics, fancy needles from the catalog. Always wondered where she got the coin." Hank filed the information away, his mind churning as he walked home. 2 days later, Clara arrived at his cabin in a state he had never seen before. Not just scared, she was terrified. She was trembling so violently she could barely stand. "She's going to kill me," Clara gasped. "Mr. Hank, I know she is." He pulled her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, and sat her by the fire, with Buster pressing against her for comfort. "Tell me what happened." Slow and steady. Clara took several shaky breaths. "Those men came back. The scary ones. They were yelling at Miss Martha, saying she owed them money, a lot of money. Gambling debts, they said. And Martha was crying and saying she would pay, but they said her time was up." She looked at Hank, her eyes wide with fear. "Then they left, and Martha started drinking. She drinks sometimes, but not like this. She was screaming and throwing things and saying she had to fix her problems." "Did she hurt you?" "Not yet. But she looked at me, Mr. Hank. She looked at me like I was the problem. Like if I wasn't there, everything would be fine." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said I was a burden. She said she never should have taken me in." Her voice broke. "She said maybe it was time to send me away. Somewhere nobody would have to deal with me anymore." Hank's jaw clenched. "You're staying here tonight. I'm going to talk to Martha tomorrow. We're making this official." "No!" Clara grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. There's more. I heard her talking to herself when she thought I was asleep. She mentioned a book, a ledger with numbers that could ruin everything. And she was talking about the widow's fund, about how the audit was coming, how she was going to prison unless she could fix it." Hank went very still. "The widow's fund. The mining company set that up after my father and the other men died. They left money to care for the families. Martha was supposed to be managing it. She's the treasurer." "And you think she's been stealing from it?" Clara nodded miserably. "I think so. I saw the book once, hidden in her room. It had all these numbers, and some of them were crossed out and changed. I didn't understand it then, but now—" She looked up at Hank. "If people find out, they'll be so angry. And she's scared, Mr. Hank. She's so scared." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The gambling debts, the collectors, Martha's desperation, and escalating cruelty. She wasn't just taking her bitterness out on Clara. She was stealing from the very fund meant to help families like Clara's, using the money to pay off her debts. And now her whole world was collapsing. "Where is this book now?" Hank asked. "Somewhere in her house. Hidden. She's always checking on it, making sure it's safe." Clara looked at him with desperate eyes. "Mr. Hank, what's going to happen?" Before he could answer, a shout came from the town, then another, then the frantic ringing of a bell, the fire alarm. Hank and Clara rushed to the window. An orange glow flickered against the dark sky. "That's coming from Martha's house," Hank said grimly. He turned to Clara. "Stay here with Buster. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me. You understand?" Clara nodded, her eyes wide with terror. Hank ran toward the fire, joining the stream of people rushing to help. By the time he got there, Martha's house was engulfed in flames. The fire was moving with unnatural speed. The old, dry timber and years of accumulated dust were perfect fuel. Sheriff Drummond was organizing a bucket brigade, but anyone could see it was too late. The house was lost. "Where's Martha?" someone shouted. "Still inside," Mrs. Henley cried. "I saw her at the window." 3 men rushed forward, covering their faces, and managed to drag Martha from the burning structure. She was coughing and sputtering, Her face blackened with soot, her hands burned. Dr. Patterson pushed through the crowd to tend to her. Hank stood back, watching the flames consume the house. Something about it felt wrong. The way the fire had spread so quickly, the timing, just hours after Clara had told him of Martha's desperation. As Dr. Patterson worked on Martha, she began to scream, her words slurred and disconnected, her eyes wild from smoke inhalation, or drink, or both. "It's her fault," Martha shrieked. "All her fault. That little witch. She burned my house down. Burned the proof. She's evil, I tell you, evil!" "Now, Martha, calm down," Dr. Patterson soothed. "Clara's just a child." "She burned it all," Martha wailed. "The book, the records, everything. She knew what I'd done and she burned it all." Sheriff Drummond moved closer. "What are you talking about, Martha? What book?" But Martha had passed out, overcome by the smoke. Hank stood frozen, the pieces slamming together in his mind. Martha hadn't pulled Clara from that house. She hadn't mentioned her name once, except to blame her, which meant Martha had either assumed Clara was in town when the fire started, or she hadn't cared. And the book, the ledger, the proof of embezzlement, it was all ash now. The timing was too convenient. The fire had spread too fast, too evenly. This was no accident. Martha had set her own house on fire. Whether it was to destroy evidence, out of a drunken despair, or some twisted combination of the two, Hank couldn't say. But one thing was certain. Martha had reached her breaking point, and desperate people do dangerous things. He thought of Clara, alone in his cabin, waiting. He thought of how close she had been to being inside that house when it went up in flames. He thought of Martha's words. Maybe it's time to send her away, somewhere nobody would have to deal with her anymore. Had Martha meant for Clara to be in the house? Had she planned the fire to solve all of her problems at once? To destroy the evidence and eliminate the one witness who knew about her crime? The thought turned his stomach to ice. As the flames gave way to smoldering embers and the crowd began to thin, Hank approached Sheriff Drummond. "Sheriff," he said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk. About Martha. About Clara. About things that have been going on for far too long." Drummond's gaze shifted from Hank to the smoking ruins, and then back again. "I reckon you might be right. Come to my office in the morning, and bring whatever proof you've been gathering." Hank's eyes widened. "You knew?" "I'm not blind, Hank. Just cautious. But after tonight—" The sheriff glanced toward Marta, who was being loaded into Dr. Peterson's wagon to be taken for treatment. "After tonight, I think it's time we stop being cautious." Hank returned to his cabin to find Clara right where he'd left her, sitting by the hearth with her arms wrapped tightly around Buster. The moment she saw him, the tears she'd been holding back began to fall. "Is she dead?" Clara asked between sobs. Is Marta dead?" "No, child. She's hurt, but she's alive." "The house is gone," Clara cried, her shoulders shaking. "It's all burned down. All of my father's things. The few things I had left of him. They're all gone." Hank pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You still have his horse. I've got him safe. And Clara, things can be replaced. You can't. The only thing that matters is that you weren't in that house." She pulled back, looking up at him with an understanding that seemed far beyond her years. "She set the fire, didn't she?" A horrifying realization dawned on her face. "And she thought I was inside." Hank couldn't bring himself to lie to her. I don't know what she was thinking, Clara, but I know you're safe now. And you're going to stay safe. You're not going back there. Not ever. Clara nodded, resting her head against his chest. What happens now? Now. Hank's eyes drifted from the wooden horse on the mantel to the photograph of Sara, to the locket that still held one empty space. Now we fight back for real. We go to the sheriff, we tell the truth, and we make sure you never have to be afraid again. What if they don't believe us? They'll believe us, Hank said, with more confidence than he felt. They had to. The alternative, sending Clara back to Marta, or into the hands of an indifferent system, was unthinkable. The fire had changed everything. Marta's desperation had forced their hand. Now, it was time to act. The morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of spring day that promised warmth, but still carried the bite of frost on the air. Hank woke to find Clara already up, sitting by the window with Buster's head in her lap, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Couldn't sleep? He asked gently. She shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I see the fire. I keep thinking, what if I had been there? What if I had gone home like I was supposed to? Hank sat beside her, his old bones creaking in protest. But you weren't. You were here. You were safe. And you're going to stay safe. Promise? I promise. Though it might get harder before it gets better. Are you ready for that? Clara squared her shoulders, and Hank saw something in her expression he had never seen before. Resolve. I'm ready. I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of hiding. I want to tell the truth. Good girl, he said softly. Because that's exactly what we're going to do today. After a small breakfast, they walked into town together. News of the fire had spread, and people stopped to stare as they passed. Hank Dalton, the reclusive widower, walking down the main street with little Clara Yates at his side, and Buster trailing at their heels. Mrs. Henley, the general store owner, stopped them outside her shop. Hank, is it true that Clara is staying with you? Since last night. And she'll stay with me until this business is settled properly, he answered. The woman's eyes went wide. But Marta is her guardian. Don't you think you ought to? Marta set fire to her own home, Hank said, his voice quiet but unyielding. Maybe thinking Clara was inside, maybe not. Either way, I'm not sending this child back to her. Not now, not ever. Mrs. Henley brought a hand to her mouth. Surely you don't think... I don't think anything. I know it. And so does Clara. He looked down at the girl. Isn't that right, honey? Clara nodded, her voice clear and steady. Mrs. Marta started the fire. I heard her earlier talking about solving her problems. And she's been stealing money from the widow's fund. She has a book with all the numbers changed. The shopkeeper's face paled. The widow's fund. But that's for families like yours, Clara. I know. Clara's voice was small but firm. That's why I'm telling. Because it's wrong. More townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the conversation. Hank saw Miss Hartley, the schoolteacher, among them, and Dr. Peterson. Even old Pete Miller had emerged from his blacksmith shop to listen. We're on our way to see Sheriff Drummond now, Hank announced to the small crowd. If any of you have something to say about how Marta's been treating this girl, now would be the time. A long silence hung in the air. Then Miss Hartley stepped forward. I have records, she said. Attendance records showing Clara missed more school than she attended. Written observations about her injuries. her withdrawn behavior, signs of malnutrition. I will testify to all of it. Dr. Peterson was next. I have medical files. I've treated her for bruises, sprains, things Marta passed off as accidents. In my professional opinion, the pattern of injuries suggests abuse. Mrs. Henley looked ashamed. I saw things too. The way Marta would grab her arm in public. The harsh words. The girl was always so thin, so quiet. I should have said something sooner. One by one, others came forward. Pete Miller had seen Marta drag Clara by the arm hard enough to leave marks. The saloon owner had overheard Marta complaining about the burden of raising her brother's child. The circuit pastor noted how Clara always flinched from an adult's touch. Sheriff Drummond came out of his office, drawn by the commotion. He took in the scene. The crowd gathered around Hank and Clara and sighed. I suppose we'd best make this official, he said. Hank, Clara, come on inside. The rest of you, I'll take your statements later. In the sheriff's office, Drummond sat down heavily and pulled out a pen and paper. Start from the beginning, he said. Tell me everything. For the next 2 hours, they talked. Clara recounted the abuse in calm, clear-eyed detail. The physical violence, the locked pantry, the hunger, the psychological cruelty. Hank presented his journal, Dr. Peterson's notes, and Miss Hartley's observations. Then Clara told them about the ledger, about Marta's gambling debts, and the embezzlement from the widow's fund. Drummond's expression grew darker with every revelation. Do you know where this ledger is now? It burned in the fire, Clara told him. But Mrs. Marta was scared of it. She said there was going to be an audit, and she'd go to jail. An audit? Drummond scribbled a note. I'll contact the mining company. They should have copies of all transactions. If there are discrepancies, he left the thought unfinished. What about Clara? Hank asked. She can't go back to Marta. No, Drummond agreed. She can't. Marta is currently at Doc Peterson's, under sedation. When she wakes, I'll be arresting her for arson at the very least. Possibly attempted murder, if we can prove she knew Clara was meant to be in that house. He looked at Clara with something akin to regret. I'm sorry, child. I should have seen the signs sooner. What's going to happen to me now? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ordinarily, you'd be sent to the county orphanage while we sort this out. Drummond held up a hand as Hank started to protest. But, given the circumstances, and the fact that you are clearly safe and well cared for with Mr. Dalton, I'm prepared to file for temporary emergency guardianship. It won't be permanent, not yet. But it'll keep you two together while we navigate the legal process. Hank felt a knot in his chest loosen. How long will that take? Could be weeks, could be months. We'll need a circuit judge to approve it, and they don't come through Ridgeline too often. But in the meantime, he looked at Clara. You'll stay with Hank, if that's what you want. Yes, Clara said immediately. Please. All right then. I'll draw up the paperwork. Drummond stood, extending a hand to Hank. You're doing a good thing here, Dalton. That child needs someone like you. That child needs someone to love her and keep her safe, Hank corrected gently. I aim to be that person for as long as she'll have me. Walking back through town, Hank noticed the difference. People weren't just staring anymore. They were nodding. A few even smiled. Miss Hartley stopped to give Clara a hug. Mrs. Henley pressed a bag of candy into the girl's hands, her eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, the shopkeeper whispered. So sorry I didn't help sooner. Clara accepted the apology with a grace beyond her years. It's okay. You're helping now. That afternoon, while Clara slept in his cabin, exhausted from the emotional strain, Hank walked up the hill to the cemetery. Sara's grave was marked by a simple headstone, weathered by 8 years of Montana seasons. He sat beside it, as he had countless times before, and told her everything. About Clara, the abuse, the fire, and his decision to fight for her, to become the parent they had never been to a child of their own. I know I'm old, he said to the cool stone. I know I should have done this years ago, should have opened my heart sooner. But Sara, this child needs me, and I think I need her too. I've been half living since you died, just going through the motions. But Clara has woken something up in me. A purpose, a love, a feeling that maybe I still have something important to do with the years I have left. The wind whispered through the pines, and Hank could almost hear Sara's voice in it. Do what is right. Love her. Be the father you always wanted to be. I will, he promised. No matter how hard it gets, no matter what it costs. I'll fight for her. I'll keep her safe. I'll give her the childhood she deserves. He pulled out his locket, flipping it open to gaze at Sara's photograph and the empty space beside it. Soon, he thought. Soon Clara's picture will fill that space, and my family will be whole again. When he returned to the cabin, Clara was awake, sitting on the porch with Buster. She was drawing, something she did when she needed to process her thoughts. She held the paper up for him to see. It was a picture of a house, not Marta's, but Hank's cabin. In front stood 3 figures, a tall man, a small girl, and a dog. Above them, in careful letters, she had written, My family. Hank had to turn away for a moment, his throat tight with emotion. When he could trust his voice again, he said, That's beautiful, Clara. Do you want to hang it up inside? Can we? Of course. This is your home now, too. You can decorate it however you like. She looked up at him, her eyes shining. Really? It's really my home? For as long as you want it to be. Forever, if I have my way. She launched herself at him, her thin arms wrapping around his waist. I love you, Mr. Hank. The words struck him like a physical blow, not of pain, but of overwhelming weight and beauty. I love you too, child, he managed, his voice thick. More than I can say. They stood there on the porch, holding each other, as the sun arced across the sky, and Buster wagged his tail at their feet. The following days were a blur of activity. Sheriff Drummond arrested Marta on charges of arson, embezzlement, child endangerment, and fraud. The mining company confirmed that nearly $5,000 was missing from the widow's fund. Money that should have gone to families like Clara's had instead been funneled to cover Marta's gambling debts. The town was scandalized. People who had once defended Marta, who had turned a blind eye to Clara's suffering, now couldn't apologize enough. They brought gifts to Hank's cabin, clothes for Clara, toys, food. Miss Hartley organized a collection to replace what Clara had lost in the fire. Through it all, Clara stayed close to Hank and Buster. She was healing. Hank could see it in the color returning to her cheeks, the weight slowly coming back to her thin frame, the sound of her laughter, which grew more frequent each day. But the trial still loomed. The custody hearing, Marta's certain opposition, Hank's own petition. 2 weeks after the fire, word came that Circuit Judge Morrison would be in town in 1 month's time to hear the case. 1 month to prepare. 1 month for Marta's lawyer to build a defense, 1 month for Hank to prove he could provide a better home for Clara than any long-lost relative the state might find. "Are you nervous?" Clara asked him one evening as they sat by the fire. "A little," Hank admitted. "But mostly, I'm determined. I'm not going to let anyone take you away." "From us?" she corrected, gesturing to include Buster, who thumped his tail in agreement. "From us," Hank smiled. "What if the judge says I have to go somewhere else?" "Then we'll fight that too," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'm not ever letting you go. I'll fight for as long as it takes." Clara was silent for a moment. "Mr. Hank, if I get to stay, if the judge says yes, would it be okay if I called you Grandpa? For real? Not just in my head?" Hank's eyes burned with unshed tears. "I would be honored. Nothing would make me happier." She smiled, satisfied, and returned to her drawing. Hank looked at his father's old compass, which he had taken from the closet. The inscription read, "Do what is right, not what is easy." This fight wouldn't be easy, but it was right, and that was all that mattered. The court battle was coming, but Hank was ready. More than ready, he was determined. No one was taking his girl. Not Marta, not the law, not anyone. Clara was his family now, and he would fight heaven and earth to keep her safe. The county courthouse was a 2-hour drive from Ridgeline, a solid brick building that had witnessed 50 years of Montana justice. Hank had never been inside before. The formality of the place, the high ceilings, the polished wood, the stern portraits of past judges, made him feel small and out of place. But Clara's hand in his kept him grounded. They sat on a hard bench in the hallway, waiting to be called. Miss Hartley sat on Clara's other side, offering silent encouragement. Dr. Patterson was there, along with Sheriff Drummond. Even Mrs. Henley had made the trip, determined to testify about what she had seen. Marta was already inside with her lawyer, a sharp-faced man from the city who had taken her case despite the evidence against her. She was out on bail pending trial, though Sheriff Drummond had made it clear she was not to go near Clara. "Are you ready?" Hank asked Clara quietly. She nodded, clutching the wooden horse her father had made. She'd carried it every day since Hank had fixed it, a tangible reminder of love and safety. "Remember, just tell the truth. That's all you have to do." "I will, Grandpa." She had started calling him that a week ago, and every time she said it, Hank's heart swelled. The courtroom doors opened. A bailiff called them in. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat behind the bench, her air of authority tempered by fairness. Hank felt a little more at ease. The proceedings began with Marta's lawyer presenting his case. He painted a picture of a woman beaten down by circumstance, struggling to raise a difficult child while dealing with her own grief and financial hardship. He suggested Hank had manipulated Clara, taken advantage of a vulnerable situation, perhaps even coached the child to make false accusations. Hank clenched his fists in his lap, but remained silent. Then it was their turn. Hank was the first to testify. His hands trembled as he took the oath, and his voice came out rougher than he intended when the lawyer asked for his name and age. "Henry Dalton, 62. Mr. Dalton, you're petitioning for custody of a 7-year-old child. Don't you find that unusual for a man your age living alone?" "I don't think age matters when it comes to love," Hank said. "And I don't live alone anymore. I have Clara." "But you have no experience raising children." "I have no formal experience, But I know right from wrong. I know what a child needs: safety, food, love, someone to protect her, no matter what. His voice grew stronger as he spoke about Clara. That little girl came to me broken and scared. Now, she's healing. She laughs, she plays, she trusts again. I may not have experience, but I have something more important. I have love for that child, and the will to do whatever it takes to keep her safe. Marta's lawyer tried to rattle him, questioning his motives, suggesting impropriety. But Hank held his ground. He had the truth on his side, and he would not be shaken. Dr. Patterson testified next, presenting medical records that painted a damning picture of repeated injuries, malnutrition, and neglect. His professional opinion was clear. Clara had been systematically abused. Miss Hartley described Clara's transformation since living with Hank. She's a different child. She participates in class now. She smiles. She plays with other students. Whatever Mr. Dalton is doing, it's working. Sheriff Drummond testified about the embezzlement, the fire, Marta's debts, and desperation. He presented the audit from the mining company, showing exactly how much Marta had stolen from families like Clara's. Then it was Clara's turn. Judge Morrison's expression softened as Clara approached the witness stand. The bailiff brought a small stool so she could reach the microphone. "Hello, Clara," the judge said gently. "I know this is scary, but I just want to hear your story in your own words. Can you do that for me?" Clara nodded, clutching the wooden horse tightly. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me what it was like living with Mrs. Yates." Clara took a deep breath and began. She described the locked pantry, the physical beatings, the hunger, the words that hurt more than any blow. She spoke calmly, without drama, simply stating the facts. But the facts were devastating. "And how does it feel living with Mr. Dalton?" Clara's face transformed. "Safe. I feel safe for the first time since my daddy died. Grandpa Hank, Mr. Dalton, he takes care of me. He teaches me things. He makes sure I eat and go to school, and he loves me. I can feel it." "Do you want to stay with him?" "Yes, ma'am. More than anything." Marta's lawyer had no questions. What could he ask that wouldn't make things worse? Then, unexpectedly, Marta herself stood up. "I want to speak." The judge allowed it. Marta looked at Clara, and for a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. "I never wanted children," she said quietly. "I took Clara in because it was expected, because people would talk if I didn't. But I resented every moment of it. I saw Thomas in her face. Thomas, who chose another woman over me. And I couldn't," her voice broke, "I couldn't love her the way she deserved. She deserves someone better than me." The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison called for a recess. "I need to reflect on everything I have heard. We will reconvene in 1 hour." Hank and Clara went outside to wait. Buster, who was tied up nearby, greeted them with enthusiastic tail wags. Clara buried her face in his fur, while Hank stood beside them, barely breathing. An hour felt like an eternity. Finally, the bailiff appeared at the door. "Judge Morrison is ready." They filed back inside, and Hank felt Clara's hand slip into his, small and trusting. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Judge Morrison surveyed the courtroom with the weight of wisdom gained from decades of difficult decisions. Her eyes rested on Clara, then Hank, then on Marta, who sat with her head bowed. "I have presided over many cases in my career," the judge began. "But few have been as clear-cut as this one. The evidence of abuse is overwhelming. The medical records, the eyewitness accounts, and the child's own testimony paint a consistent picture of systematic cruelty and neglect. Marta's shoulders shook, but she didn't raise her head. Furthermore, the evidence of embezzlement from the widow's fund, money meant to help families exactly like Clara's, demonstrates a level of callousness that shocks the conscience. Ms. Yates, you will be facing criminal charges for these actions, and I have no doubt you will serve significant prison time. The judge's gaze returned to Hank. As for the custody petition, I have rarely seen a clearer case for removing a child from her current situation. The question before me is not whether Clara should remain with Ms. Yates. She absolutely should not. The question is whether Mr. Dalton is the right person to take her in. Hank held his breath. Clara squeezed his hand so tightly he could feel her pulse racing. Mr. Dalton, you are 62 years old. You are a widower with no children of your own and no formal experience in raising them. By conventional standards, you may not seem the ideal candidate for guardianship. Judge Morrison paused, and a small smile touched her lips. But the law is not just about conventions. It is about what is in the best interest of the child. And everything I have seen and heard today tells me that the best interest of Clara is to be with you. Hank felt a swell of emotion in his chest. The transformation described by her teacher, the medical improvements documented by Dr. Patterson, and most importantly, the light I see in that child's eyes when she looks at you. These things speak louder than any concerns about age or experience. You have given her what every child deserves: safety, love, and a chance to heal. Judge Morrison straightened the papers in front of her. Therefore, I am granting emergency guardianship of Clara Yates to Henry Dalton, effective immediately. The full adoption process may begin in 6 months, provided the current arrangement continues to serve Clara's well-being. Miss Yates's parental rights are hereby terminated. A quiet wave of celebration rippled through the courtroom. Miss Hartley was crying. Dr. Patterson nodded, satisfied. Mrs. Henley dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Clara let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and threw herself into Hank's arms. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, feeling tears trace paths down his own weathered face. "We did it," Clara whispered against his chest. "We really did it. You did it, sweetheart. You were so brave." Outside, Buster heard the commotion through the courtroom doors and began to bark happily, wagging his tail so hard his whole body shook. When they emerged, Clara ran to him, dropping to her knees to hug the dog, who had been part of her rescue from the very beginning. The townspeople who had made the trip gathered around, offering congratulations and promises of support. Mrs. Henley was one of the first. "I'm so sorry," she said again, this time to both Hank and Clara. "I should have done something sooner. We all should have, but I promise you, anything you need, anything at all, you just ask." Others echoed the sentiment. Clothes, supplies, help with the cabin, someone to watch Clara if Hank needed to go to town. The offers poured in from people who had looked away for too long and were now desperate to make amends. Dr. Peterson pulled Hank aside. "I'll be monitoring her recovery. No charge. It's the least I can do after being too cautious for too long." Miss Hartley was beaming. "Having her back in school full-time will be wonderful. She's so bright, Hank. With the right care and encouragement, she's going to do remarkable things." Sheriff Drummond came up last, holding out a hand to Hank. "I should have acted sooner. I should have trusted my gut instead of hiding behind procedure. I'm sorry it took a crisis to force my hand. Hank shook his hand, but then he addressed the whole group. His voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate all the support. Clara and I both do. But I want to say one thing, and I want you all to hear it. The gathering fell silent. Never again look away from a child who is suffering. I don't care how uncomfortable it makes you, how awkward it is to interfere, or how much easier it is to mind your own business. When a child is hurting, it becomes everyone's business. We're a community, and that means we protect the most vulnerable among us. The townspeople absorbed his words in solemn silence. Then Mrs. Henley spoke for them all. You're right, and we promise to do better. The sun was setting as Hank, Clara, and Buster walked to the wagon for the ride home. Clara walked between them, one hand on Hank's arm, the other resting on Buster's head. Grandpa? She said softly. Yes, sweetheart. Is it okay if I call you that now? The judge said you're my guardian, but, Clara, there is nothing in the world I would rather hear than you calling me that. She beamed up at him, and in the golden light of the sunset, she looked like what she was finally becoming, a happy child. Can I ask you something else? Anything. Your locket, the one with Mrs. Sara's picture? You said there was room for another photo. Her voice grew shy. Could we maybe get our picture taken together for it? Hank stopped walking, struck by the simple beauty of the request. I would love that. We'll go into town next week and get a proper one done. Clara's face lit up. For real? For real. You're my family now, Clara. My granddaughter, in every way that matters. And I want the whole world to know it. She hugged him again, tight and trusting, and Buster nudged against their legs, his tail wagging. They continued on their way home as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Clara walked between her grandfather and the dog. Finally, completely safe. And somewhere, Sara was smiling. 6 months had passed since the trial, and autumn had painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The first frost had come and gone, and the air carried the promise of winter. Ridgeline had changed in subtle ways. People greeted each other more warmly on the street. They asked after one another's children with genuine concern. There was a watchfulness now, a collective awareness that had been missing before. The town had learned its lesson, though it had come at a high price. But it was on Hank's property where the changes were most profound. What had once been a widower's solitary refuge now brimmed with Clara's presence in every corner. A small garden she had helped plant, now dormant for the winter, stretched along the south side of the cabin. Her drawings decorated the interior walls, colorful scenes of mountains, animals, and family. The toys Hank had carved for her sat on shelves he'd built. A second chair had appeared at the table, and a small bed now stood where his storeroom used to be. The cabin had become a home. Morning came with the sound of Clara's voice calling from her room. Grandpa, is it time for chores yet? Almost, Hank called back. Get dressed and come on down. She appeared minutes later, a whirlwind of energy and chatter, her dark hair pulled into a braid he'd finally mastered. She had grown in the last 6 months, not just in height, but in substance. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes sparkled with life. She moved with confidence, her body no longer cringing from phantom blows. Buster's already outside, she announced, pulling on her coat. I heard him barking at something. Probably a squirrel. That dog never learns they're faster than he is. Clara laughed, a sound that still made Hank's heart swell, and she headed out into the crisp air to help with the morning routine. She collected the eggs now, fed the chickens, and helped carry in firewood. She chattered constantly as she worked, sharing thoughts, observations, and questions about everything under the sun. She was thriving. School was going well. Mrs. Hartley reported that Clara had not only caught up to her grade level, but was excelling in some subjects. She'd made real friends, the kind who invited her to their homes and included her in their games. The withdrawn, frightened child was gone, replaced by a girl who was bright, curious, and engaged with the world. Dr. Peterson had confirmed her physical recovery. The malnutrition was a thing of the past. The old wounds had long since faded. A new Clara, healthy and growing, was emerging more each day. The adoption was set to be finalized the following month. It was just a formality now, Drummond had assured them. Martha was serving a 10-year sentence for embezzlement and child endangerment. She had relinquished all parental rights without a fight, perhaps the first selfless thing she had ever done for Clara. One evening, as October gave way to November, Hank and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. Buster lay between them, his graying muzzle resting on Clara's lap. "Tell me about Mrs. Sara again," Clara said softly. It had become their ritual, these talks about the woman who had once filled Hank's life. And so Hank told her stories of Sara's laughter. He spoke of her kindness, her way of turning ordinary days into something special, of her dreams of having children, of their quiet life together, and the love that had sustained him long after she was gone. "I think she would have liked me," Clara said when he finished. "Liked you?" Hank shook his head. "Sweetheart, she would have."